All right, I think I'm doing it. And Bryce, probably your problem would be solved by clearing all of your cookies too, but I'll take one for the teachers because it's a pain when you have to do that. All right, we are streaming live. Let's pull up our living agenda. And I feel like there were a couple of issues that came up that would be like a quick check-in on open GitHub issues or pull requests that we should talk about. So let's do, if that's all right, let's go through those first and just making sure we time box it so they don't take longer than what I think would be a quick check-in.
Is number 4 from last week already? Did we do that and it just isn't X'd out?
No, we didn't do it at all yet.
Okay.
It's on the toolbox. So we have an open pull request. I don't quite know the status of it. I think it's on the toolbox. Let's take a peek. Yes. So this was the expand display template. It has a very long comment thread. It says it's been approved by Bryce and by me. There's open questions from you, Michelle, it looks like. Do we think this is ready to merge?
There are conflicts, but I mean,
maybe
yeah.
Michelle fixed the conflicts. Oh,
No, they're still on. Yeah. I'm on the PR too. I think you don't see them unless you're signed in.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Right. The conflicts was because I was using.
I fixed some older conflicts. I mean,
you fixed some.
I did fix some conflicts. So
yeah, that's earlier. That's earlier on in the thread. There are new ones.
They're new conflicts. Okay. Sorry.
Just so you know, we can see your screen.
You can see my one-time authenticator.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know that you're doing.
I appreciate
stuff.
it.
Yeah.
And I'm saying it really is. It's okay if you see.
Yep. I do have to leave at or a little before 12.
Okay. Great. So this will be ready to merge then once the conflicts are resolved. Is that where things stand?
I think so.
Okay,
I was good with it.
No.
I can say
I thought it was resolved.
Does seem like that.
No, there are active conflicts. GitHub's being annoying and not actually showing what they are. Rebasing. You do a lot of weird stuff, so maybe rebase is not the best here, but
it's not showing that there are conflicts at all.
Yeah, it doesn't show any conflict.
Like if you look at the Zoom
screen. I just merged this pull from actions black, maybe that resolved it. I just did that this morning.
I'm very confused because I have.
You're
actively,
showing.
Actively.
Are you on the same issue? Are you sure you're on the same pull request?
It's the only PR. It's PR 52, right? It's the only PR open.
Yeah, PR 52. Do you want to share your screen? Just take
I am. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I share the right one.
Okay.
I just have it.
That's the AI.
Oh, I have it cannot be rebased.
Weaver?
Oh, okay, sure. Okay.
Just create a merge command. Yeah. Okay.
Why did they gray that? Okay, never mind. That's what it was. It was grayed out, and so I thought I couldn't do anything. But I can drop it down. Okay.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Apologies. That's all my fault.
Okay, no problem. All right, so I'll merge that now. Perfect. And this is mostly a new feature, so it gives us a little room. If there's something that pops up that we didn't get to in the issue thread, we'll make a new issue for it. I feel like that should be safe to do. Great. That's always nice. You see, oh, Michelle, you had made a pull request on the dashboard. Thanks for all the work on the installation script. I think that is definitely moving it in the right direction. I had a question about it. I'm just going to give people a little context. My cat just keeps trying to step on my keyboard. And all right. So two things we could just get people's thoughts on. So one is we added like a lot of detail here about this. What we're talking about here is the installation script, which walks you through screen by screen setup of the assembly line, essentially. And one of the things it does is help you set up a GitHub account that you're going to use for various things tied to the.
And as a bit of context, a developer would run this on their own server. So they would install the dashboard, and then run this on their own server.
So that's an existing process. I was seeing the AL Kiln setup, and I'm thinking, oh, there's a lot of things that are nicely done there that we could benefit from for our overall installation. So one question is, do we want people to see things like this, where it shows exactly what setting of the config it's setting? My inclination is no, but we could talk about that. And the other thing is, do we want to have a review screen in the middle of the setup? And my thought there is no. But, oh, the big question is there a security benefit to having two different GitHub accounts for two different purposes? And this install script assumes that they're going to just be the same, which I think is a fine thing for us to decide to do, but I just want to decide it in assembly line in the installation script. So the two purposes are, one thing it does is it lets you check when was the last commit on this repository. And the other thing that you can do with the GitHub account is add issues on people's repositories. So, and the question is, do those need to be unique? Is there a security benefit from having those be separate accounts, or letting people make them be separate accounts?
A separate account for each of those things?
For those two different purposes. I mean, I guess one thing is you could decide to just make, you can, I mean, you don't have to use both things, right? You could say, I'm not going to do the thing that's requires a little bit more privileges.
I think they would need the same permissions, so I'm not sure, right? Like, so I don't think there would be a security benefit there.
Yeah, they're different permissions.
Yeah, like you can unauthenticated, you can get the last commit dates. Like, I mean, you can go to a GitHub repo not signed in on the website and see when the last commits and stuff were. But you do need something.
Right now it requires it. Right now it does require some authentication because of the way it's written in the code.
Well, I'm saying I could go into curl right now and type out the manual API without authenticating, and it would work. Not necessarily this particular code, but just in general, you can do that without.
Sure. But like if we were, I'm just saying that right now in the code, it does use authentication information. It doesn't just make a curl request. So
yeah, I know
that. Okay.
So right now, authenticated if you don't have it, but
yeah,
I don't think they're the same API permissions.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that was the main point I was trying to make
on the private access token.
Yeah, but one isn't any API permissions at all, so we actually don't need this for that.
You don't need them if you don't have a logged in account, you are throttled to like a pretty low number of requests you can make.
I think 10 an hour, maybe. No.
Okay.
100 an hour, maybe. I'll have to check that. By the way.
Well, I like both of these need very low permissions at the most that you're just a user. I'm not sure which permissions that is in it's unclear to me which just make an issue permission is in the personal access token settings. But in that case, they do both need permissions, and they would probably just need the same permissions because all you need to be is a user to make an issue on a public repository.
I don't believe that it was just creating any account, but it's possible. I know for checking, you don't need any special permissions at all. I thought for making an issue,
you need to be a user. You just need to be a user. So
definitely
you can turn off issues, but that's a separate thing. And I think Off the top of my head, I think Michelle might be right, but I don't. It's one of those things. If I don't know, and GitHub keeps adding weird settings and changes like this all the time, and so I don't know if that's still the case. But last time I probably.
Well, I don't know.
If I had to guess now, it would be that. Yeah, you can make
I-
if it's public, you can make it. Any account can make it. So.
And that said, if it's private, you need repository permissions. So if a repository is private, you're going to need repo level permissions,
I think
which
that's
is a
the
more
issue
complex picture.
is when you create a private access token, it can't necessarily do everything that a user can do, even if it's something that any user could do on a public account. You have to tell it has permissions to do certain action. I'm pretty sure that
then I'm not sure what.
Permissions didn't work, but I could be wrong. I could be remembering wrong. You're right that they're not very restricted permissions. That's the discussion. Like, is there a value in separating them? Is the question. So
yeah,
I don't think they're the same. I'm pretty sure, but that's not really relevant. If it is the same, either way, they're very similar low-level permissions. I mean, that would make it easy to decide, but we don't have to figure that out if we already think they're low enough that it's worth merging.
Have if we there's so I'm on the make a new personal access token page now, and there's not anything specific about issues that I can see from the scope. It's just repo scope.
It's repo
for private repositories, but there's nothing about there's no specific setting for let this personal access token make an issue somewhere.
Yep.
There might be more that I was thinking, like you want to restrict an account to making issues on your. You might want to restrict it the other way on the repository.
But that's the thing is I'm saying it's also not. I couldn't find it. I was looking around in the repository settings and I couldn't find anything there. And it might be something that GitHub's added that I just can't find because that happens often. But from what I remember, at least GitHub used to work of if it was public, you can make it, or anyone can make an issue. If it's private, you have to log in and you can turn off issues. And that's the only. I don't think there's any
if it's public, if it's only people with accounts can make an issue. So you can't just be a member of the public. You have to log in to make an issue.
Well, okay, sorry. Yeah, that was sorry. I thought that was implicitly what I was trying to say. But you're right to clarify it.
Okay.
I don't know if we can assume that the automatable permissions are exactly the same, but I mean, it sounds like no one really thinks we need to make these separate accounts, which is fine with me. If so, I think we just need to make that change in assembly line, not in the installation script, to conflate the two ideas.
So should this PR wait on that?
I don't know if it really matters. I think we could probably clean up the language that says it's doing two things and then remove the extra one, or we could wait. I think either is fine. It's not urgent, I suppose, in that way, but also it's backwards compatible if it continues to work this way, I suppose. Does anybody think there's a security benefit separating it if there is a possibility that they're different permissions?
I think the only security benefit would be if someone just doesn't want to allow something to make issues, then they should be able to turn that off. I don't think there's any benefit to separating that.
Currently, we can't turn that off. Yeah,
and
I addressed that in the comments.
Yeah, and so that would be like I guess maybe an AL thing.
Yeah. Or a GitHub feedback. Like we have a GitHub feedback.
So, yeah, that's
thing.
separate repo.
So that's a separate repo.
Right. They can just not add the feedback link on their interview, of course.
Yeah, as long as like there's somewhere to turn that off somewhere, then that would be the only security thing I think. But I can't think of any reason why if you have the ability to look at an issue or to make a new issue, there's zero reason you would want to be able to have that separated from the same thing that looks at the last updated commit.
Okay.
And the other question being the display of the config, like explicitly describing where in the config it's appearing and what the config looks like.
Does anyone have what that actually like, or have this interview like
I can run
in a playground or something? Because I'd like to look at to see what that looks like.
I think I can go through the first couple streams without actually setting anything. So let me try that.
I mean, do you want to see a config file, or are you saying you want to see this new interview?
I just wanted to see the interview and specifically what we're looking at, like what the interview is showing that Quinn's talking about taking out, right?
So I can.
It's going to display the actual private access token.
Oh, okay.
I'll give you a link to run it though.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. And in that case, if we're not doing it before recording, I can just look at this.
I have it up somewhere. I have it up. I can run it if we want.
Well, no, I think the issue is just showing it on the recording.
Yeah, I can show. Oh, I see.
No, we don't want to do that
because of the details. Got it.
Private access.
Well, we can pause the recording and I guess you can't pause.
You can't pause the stream. You can't. We can pause the screen share, but then it would just be the same as everyone like just going through it independently.
I can show the review screen because that's secure. I can show the review screen with fake information if you want.
Well, I think it's okay for Bryce just to run it too. So it's not super obtrusive, I think, but I think I was just trying to decide about this, and I don't think we want to show all of the background that the script does on every screen. I don't see the installation script as an educational tool. I see it as like a tool to help people get up and running quickly. So that would be my inclination. But oh, I just noticed this here. We want to make sure that I remove some quotes.
Darn smart quotes.
They're sometimes okay, but it's all whenever I look in a YAML validator, it highlights.
How do you type them? I don't even know how to type them on my computer.
I think it was a copy and paste.
Yeah, it was a copy paste.
Okay.
Which is the same thing we're talking about in that other issue, Bryce.
Yes.
I just made a comment about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, anyway, I guess keeping in mind Michelle's availability, the threads there, if people are thinking they have to take more time to decide, then people can add feedback to this pull request too.
Okay.
All right, that was okay. So I'm going to add a issue on the assembly line. I guess it might be on the GitHub feedback form, actually. Probably it's on the GitHub feedback form. Right?
Which is a question?
Where we want to start using the same account that can create, or I guess, no, it could be in the assembly line. It could be either way. I suppose the account we really want to switch is the one in the assembly line.
I think the config it uses, I think the different functionalities just use different configs. So in assembly line, the updated date is, it should be an assembly line if you just want to replace that with GitHub issues. Like you need to replace it in either. And it would make sense to replace it where with the updated date. So if we want to change the configuration name in general to a different name than GitHub issues.
I think I got the issue. Anything else wrong? Put it on there. Let's see. All right. So, I mean, I'm happy to bounce the DevOps discussion to any week that we have. automating a form from scratch. I think that's really for Lily. So we can jump onto that later. I feel like we actually did cover save load, dialog visual feedback. I don't feel like we need to jump onto it more today. We can if we have extra time. But I'd love to hear about the test question and MyPy that you had raised, Bryce, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't have any like more. I didn't actually have time to like write out anything else out. But the general idea is, if just the idea of one trying to test coverage, and test coverage stuff and or typing would actually be useful for development. And that it splits. So I guess for the first part would be coverage, which we would split into, I think it would be like essentially, and that splits out into tools that already exist and run on Python that we could very clearly, like all of our .py modules, we could run some unit tests and get a report that says all of these functions and the unit tests, or like these lines of code and unit tests have been run. We get however much coverage we have and whether or not certain functions are not even being covered at all. We have some level of confidence that at least like this function works somewhat and it's not going to be completely broken. The other part, which is what would be a bit more difficult, would be trying to get it working through Kiln and or would be mostly just trying to get it working through Kiln and trying to determine, okay, what screens and what like code blocks or any of that stuff has been triggered. And there's like probably a weird hacky way we could do it without like trying to modify docassemble, and there would probably be a easier, like a slightly better way if we did try and get some more docassemble internal stuff. But mostly just, is the idea useful? Like is it useful to try and
some of the things?
Sorry?
Like is this like the issue I was talking about with like some of the things you want to test that are in attachment blocks where it's hard to create those docassemble, or is there more we should write down than that? Just trying to make sure I capture this in notes. Let's stop the share.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you're talking about with the attachments blocks, but
not address blocks, sorry, attachment blocks, where they make the DA file collection, which is hard to create in code.
Oh, that whole stuff. A little bit. Not exactly sure. But yeah, it's essentially like, at least that's why like it would be useful to, and mostly like we could do unit tests, and that would be like a relatively easy thing to do. It would at least take, like if I dedicated a day to it, I could get test coverage in assembly line just on the .py modules. But like whether or not that's really worth it for all of the complexity that we have in docassemble, because of like things like you mentioned, like the DA file collection, we can only do so much with it in direct Python code, and there's a lot more that's happening on the docassemble side that we wouldn't be able to check unless we just straight up run the code and try and see what screens we are hitting and what blocks those trigger and everything else.
I think if we could make it so that we're not covering that it doesn't try and cover like docassemble stuff, that it just tries to cover stuff that's in our folder, right?
Yeah.
Which there must be a way to limit it.
Oh yeah, no,
that could be useful. I don't know. It seems useful. I'm not saying we want to get 100% complete coverage. That's, 100% coverage is often, a red herring, like, or whatever it's called. Mm-hmm. But it would be nice to know if we're like 5% covered, versus like, 70% covered or something like that. It could be useful, but it depends who it's for, right? If it's for people coming to see, oh, how is this project doing, then that's not as useful because they won't understand the amount of coverage we're looking for. Versus if it's us and we know kind of what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. that's a good point. I think also like this is another point I haven't really that we could distinguish between is whether or not this is like, at least I feel the setting up like unit tests and just Python stuff would be solely for us. It would just be on our assembly line repo. If we wanted to try and get it into Kiln, it could be like just a Kiln feature that we have and we run in our GitHub Actions, but also is just anyone who's using Kiln would get like, oh, this is you're hitting like of all of the code blocks in this this YAML file, you're hitting these and you're just completely not testing like this one really big question or something like that. And so that's just a different thing of like whether or not, and I think there's a bit of both, but I like, and it's mostly a combination of how much do we want it for our general, not security, but well, the calmness of mind that our code is working.
I think Kilnit could be useful,
versus-
especially for random input testing, because then you'd
Yeah.
have like a list of like blocks that didn't get hit. So I think that could be useful because you're trying to, I don't know, from random input testing, I think the challenge is what useful information can we give you? So if you could see, oh, these random input tests ran, but they didn't hit these blocks at all, and I did want those tested, then that's something good to know. I don't know. But I don't know who will be looking at it. Like knowing specific things that were missed versus just like percent coverage, I think is more useful than just percent coverage.
And we'd get both.
Yep.
Like you don't get percent coverage unless you have the list of specific things that you missed.
Yeah.
Displaying it in a good UI or UX somehow is a different question, but we would get both. In worst case, it's in a log somewhere that you scroll through. That is your YAML file with like a plus or a minus by each thing that was covered or wasn't covered. That's generally what most coverage tools like that can do.
Oh, so the input would be an interview, and you say what features are you using that are covered by our unit tests? So that would be the way to say the percent coverage, basically.
Like what
Basically,
blocks?
yeah. Like because at least coverage mostly is just like you turn on some switch that says at the beginning of your test process that says I'm running coverage, which we could do in a feature file or likely just in the GitHub action for Kiln, just would it like pass a parameter that says I want coverage, and then at the end you just run it, and like while it's doing that, it's logging. Okay, I've hit this question, and at the end you just have some process that like goes through all of those logs of I've hit this question, and compiles it into something that's actually readable.
Though I will say that I'm not sure how well we could measure how many of the options were covered inside a question. Like,
So
I'm
we're not
sure how
talking about
well
just
we-
testing the Python code. We're talking about a unit test concept applied more to the interview level rather than a
As-
end-to-end unit test.
Yes, yeah.
I
guess
think the
I'm not-
discussion
you're right.
is
These are
about
two
both, but yeah.
Yeah, you're right. But it's I brought it up thinking of both, but they are separate discussions. And the first one is of just our Python code is much more scoped. It's like would take a day if we really want it, if we think it's useful. And the latter is a much bigger scope with actual coding involved and like new features that we would have to add. But also would be, in my opinion, a lot more useful because that's generally I've found most of the time my code is not breaking in the Python modules, it's breaking in the interview somewhere.
That's
but
fair.
that's, and I feel like at least and also for most people who are writing, they're not using Python modules. They're using, they're writing their own interviews. And so I guess it's a matter of how much we want to be just certain that our code is correct versus helping other people make sure their code is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really even know how to approach the block question. I agree with you. It could be useful. I also think that the unit tests for the Python modules are pretty low maintenance. They're really easy to understand, I think, generally. So it feels like it's a good value add. I've broken stuff in the Weaver for sure at the Python module level. And I think in the assembly line modules, there's less of that, but it could still be a good idea. And they're going to be fairly static. They don't have to change too often. So I like the idea. We might discover some things we just didn't implement because they're uncommon use cases too. But I'm going to be less helpful about the AL kill part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a question of like, as a developer, would you want to know which YAML blocks you haven't hit, right? So it's less of a like, do you want to build it, and more of a like, would it be useful to you as a developer?
I guess I don't quite understand how it would work, maybe. So is the idea you're going to see, did your end-to-end tests, all of them collectively, capture every block? Is that the idea?
That's roughly the idea, yeah. Like you're in like, yeah.
Now, Cucumber isn't exactly built for that kind of testing, so I'm not sure what it'll let us do, but it's something we can look into if it's worth it. Yeah, sure.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a Cucumber thing, because 90% of that logic is, well, of what we're like, what screen we're hitting in each time is being done in our code. Like we see screen IDs all the time, and we see.
Yeah, but
Pulling
a
this
way
up,
to,
sure.
we can talk about the details that I'm specifically thinking of another time.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't want this conversation to go on for too long, but.
For another project, well, I'm just thinking about this. Like, well, is that I guess it makes sense because you're going to always be changing your tests. But I just wanted to show this other idea, which I've been working on, and Michelle, I've already shown it to Michelle, is a way of generating tests from the YAML file. And they're randomized, but they're starting from the YAML file.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it would be too hard to build something that said, I'm going to generate a random choice that covers all of the possible options here for binary choices, at least, or maybe.
Sure, but it wouldn't tell you whether that screen actually got triggered. It would just tell you that a random value was created for it.
Correct. That is true. How would we check that for the features? You have to actually run each test to know that, right?
You'd run the tests, and then the tests at the end would print out these blocks weren't covered, or all blocks were covered, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not about looking at the collective set of your features. It's on a given run, how much of the interview did you encounter on that run?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. But then you are like, if you have a few different runs and they're hitting slightly different features, slightly different screens, then you are still saying, oh, I hit both of these screens in 2 different runs. We'll consider those covered.
Because it would look at all of the features that are tested
in aggregate.
The whole run. When it runs,
yeah.
what it does, it runs it as one action. Right, of course, that makes sense. Okay.
Yes.
All right. It's an interesting idea. Yeah, and I can see this isn't really the same thing. I mean, it does make me think, is that useful? Yes. To see if you've met all of the question IDs, for example, might be nice to know. Did you learn everything about all the possible input to the interview from that? Not really.
No.
It's going to be combinatorially complex.
Yes, agreed. And I don't think that is not.
That would not be the goal.
Intent here, or like the goal. That's generally not the intent or goal of coverage.
Okay.
Like I think it's just generally accepted in most places that you can't test everything, and so coverage at least tells you, hey, like you're not touching this at all. You have no idea if it's right. Which is like, I think especially true in the doc-assemble Python area where it's just like you don't know if this is even wrong until you like run the until you like can hit that question inside of a running interview, because there could just be some weird thing that isn't checked when you upload it to the playground.
Okay. And we do have this problem of like nested interviews. So
yeah, and that's like sort of what Michelle had mentioned at the beginning, and is a thing you can like we obviously have to be a thing we would have to make, but it's a thing that would not be super hard of just like don't like if it's a question ID that isn't already in like a YAML file that's in the package being tested, don't worry about it because you're including it from somewhere else, and that's
So the
something else.
coverage
And
of that package would be the one you'd be looking at.
yes, yeah.
For things that are like umbrella interviews, like the up to code interview that I'm working on.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really do want to know how they interact. Or if it's something like the affidavit of indigency, which is embedded into another interview, you want to know how it interacts. Because you answer some questions that are relevant to the sub interview in the main interview.
And I think that makes sense, but I don't know if that's exactly like, you don't need, but that's just like if you have a test that is, it like is running over whatever interviews, including the affidavit, that's good. You don't necessarily like need the affidavit, need to know that you've covered all of the affidavits lefts and rights within the, or like from the included interview. You just need to know,
Okay.
as long as there's some way you can run the affidavit interview separately and be like, okay, let me try and make sure I've hit all of these weird possible edge cases there.
The idea would be that each package would be taking care of its own testing.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm saying like that's not really good enough for interviews that are built as an umbrella around other interviews. But that's okay. I think you're right. As long your test would still do its functionality, you just wouldn't know the coverage of the sub interview.
Yeah, and umbrella, like if it's specifically just like, oh, you can't run this YAML.YAML file by itself because it's only run in other places, that's a little bit trickier, and I wasn't sure how to handle that part yet. But
yeah, the whole thing. I mean, it's a good question. The whole thing is a bit of a question because understanding which YAML blocks were run from which files, I'm saying, I just want to say I don't know what of this is possible, but the question of whether we want to even approach it is a good one, right? If it would be useful at all.
Yeah.
Would this kind of heuristic be possible where you just get the question ID of the YAMLs in the YAML file that you're testing?
Yeah, I think that would be like at least the MVP here of just be hitting questions. And I don't think like a better product would be like, oh, would look at code blocks and actually try and test coverage of that too. But that I think needs more instrumentation in docassemble, and would be a bit more complicated. But at the very least, like if this screen is shown, it's that's like could be considered like covered, I think.
And you can examine the YAML file that you're testing.
Yeah. I think this would rely on a lot of like, okay, we know what's in this YAML file.
Yeah, that's good. Or I mean, you could even look at all the YAML files in the package, I guess, and not worry about which one it's in. That might not or might not be helpful. Maybe you mostly want to test the specific YAML file. I can imagine people setting it up where there's one main YAML file that launches the other ones. That's when you test. But almost all the questions are in a different YAML. That's how I designed Made, for example.
Yeah. So that
I have to go, but y'all can feel free to continue. All right.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah, thanks. Good luck. This sounds like a good idea to me.
That's fair. I was gonna say, Lily, you haven't. I don't know if you had any thoughts on this at all, but
I think it's a great idea. We can make it available, and also we don't have to make it so complicated from the start, like umbrella interviews, right? I think that can be like a feature enhancement, but we can get some basic features adding. That'd be great.
Okay, yeah, that's a good emphasis there of just making it MVP quickly and seeing if it's useful. I think I think this is definitely like we've fleshed out this a lot. Thank you for everyone's input. For the MyPy stuff, which is a bit more MyPy stuff follows sort of the same idea of we could just do it on the Python parts or we could try to do it over everything. But the doing MyPy over everything is a lot more complicated than just trying to see if we've hit a screen. And while that's the part that does seem like it would be a lot more useful because there's just so many weird things, and most code and that's going to be doing weird things that you might want to type check would be in your code blocks. But even then, it just seems like a lot bigger of a scope. Like, yeah, I'm not thinking necessarily even trying to just like MyPy, like, oh, we're using this variable in this question, but just like grabbing all the code blocks and trying to run MyPy on that. Even that is a lot more complicated because of the just unordered everything in docassemble. And
saying it would be like the value might change, the type might change over the life of.
Yeah, like the way MyPy works, because it's able to like see, oh, it's assigned here, and it can like fairly sort of deduce everything else past that, like what other types might be. And if we don't have a solid ordering of where things are going to happen, that makes it really, really complicated. So with that in mind, at least for this, it would just be running MyPy on the assembly line and like maybe Weaver. Weaver seems a little less critical because of people aren't consuming it as much, but it might be useful if it's in the assembly line and people are like extending those functions there.
I mean, if it really does rely on executing all the code blocks, you know if they're right, and the value is assigned in a question, which is probably the case. How helpful is it, I guess?
Like, I don't even think it would be possible to run on interview Python.
We would have to like make some kind of fake code block, right? Maybe parse the question file, say, okay, this is this data type, so we're going to set the value that it references on the right to that value, a value that is exemplar of that data type or something.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. I don't know if it's related or not, because I noticed that the Python code sometimes, most of the time, it works the same if you add a code block in a YAML file or you put it into a py file. But sometimes they don't function the same way. Or it could work in YAML but doesn't work in Py, or vice versa. I'm just wondering, would that add some complexity when you are doing this kind of testing?
Yeah, I think it would.
And generally, yeah. Which is why, like, I'm at least for this, it seems just much harder than the already hard like coverage stuff. And so I kind of don't even want to. It was mostly I was bringing it up because I feel like we spent a lot of time for the last part talking about how it would be applicable to interview Python, and this seems not necessary, or not that it's not necessary, but it seems much out of scope. That would be like if I would love to work on that full time for like a month, and I would maybe be able to make some progress. But
yeah, I mean, it'd be pretty cool if you could do it, but Python is strictly typed, but dynamic strict typing.
Yeah,
so it's a tough combination.
So it's a bit much.
JavaScript would just kind of let you move past those mistakes in its own dangerous way, but at least, yeah. Anyway, in a way that wouldn't cause your server to crash. I'm just wondering how Jonathan builds this ast here to get this, and I wonder if that's helpful.
Yeah, I've seen how he does some of those. So these specific ones are, I think he has a whole bunch complicated of scanning, like interview scanning code that finds things that it predicts are variables of some type.
Maybe we could start with that point, or maybe we could just kind of scope the problem a little bit and say to Jonathan, hey, I don't know if he's interested in doing typing because none of his code is typed. But
I think that's the thing, is if we wanted to try and like to have more docassemble interview stuff, we could start with just typing assembly line and then sort of maybe start to work back into like, because they're like MyPy has ways you can essentially say, like, I'm going to manually define someone else's libraries types. So we could do that for docassemble. And then once we've got to a point where it's like pretty like, oh, this function doesn't really change that much, we can maybe try and suggest like make a few PRs in docassemble itself that are like, maybe we add typing into these functions themselves, instead of just this stub that we make and maintain ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I really like this idea. I mean, that's why I started doing type hints.
Yeah.
I've definitely run into errors with types before. So
Yeah, and at least
I
one of
think
the
you're
things
right. It would be most helpful in the YAML. But even if we just had it on our modules, it would be great to just start setting up an action that just checks to make sure our modules are using types correctly.
Yeah, because that was one of the things I don't think I realized when types happened is you can write all the types you want, but unless you have something running MyPy anywhere, it like you can write nonsense types and they will run fine. And they're only actually ever checked when you explicitly run MyPy, which is just a thing. I don't know why I didn't realize that for an embarrassingly long time. It was like several months after we started adding types in. I was like, I think I found one that I had written that was wrong. And I was like, why was this wrong? It didn't tell me it was wrong.
And I'd love to do it and just to get that feedback
Okay.
on our Python modules. So that I think is just like, there probably is an existing MyPy action we could probably just turn on, right?
Likely, yeah. And even if there isn't, it would not be super hard to add that or add that into the same action we have as like the unit test. Just like install MyPy, run MyPy, the same way you would in a bash. So
okay. It's probably good to make it its own action. It's kind of hard to dive in and see, okay, this action passed, or it has 10 subparts that one of them passed and one of it didn't. So I'm okay with having multiple actions for me, but I don't know if that's the way most people do it or not. I guess I don't need to. We don't need to do it a special Snowflake way, but I'd be okay to just turn on this option. All right. Well, I think you're right that the rest of it is hard, but just having the limited first pass at it, just like with unit tests are easy, or easy-ish. That's an easy thing to say. Yep, we'll just do it. It's one more thing that's going to be helpful.
Cool. Okay.
Even if everything we can do is so big.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. As long as we agree that, and mostly want to test the waters and make sure that like, yeah, test types are useful and coverage would be probably useful, because it's one of those things that it might be useful and it might not be for our specific project, but it sounds like we're at least all on the same page that it would be useful.
Yeah, totally would be useful, especially like anything that would help us get more confidence before we release code, given how fragile it can be.
Yeah.
All that benefits, the better. All right, let's look at the rest of our list here. Thanks for bringing up both those as ideas. Hold this off for when Michelle is available.
Had Michelle added that one?
No, it was my idea, but I mentioned it briefly to Michelle and she was interested.
Okay.
We could wait to discuss it. And it's not urgent. It's basic. I'll just describe the basic idea is right here. Instead of having our deployments be, we had this whole conversation a while ago about how we could know that our production server had the same versions of stuff as our development server. And one way would be just to use Docker the way most people use Docker, which is to deploy the whole container, not to install things into a running Docker container.
Oh, yeah.
That's basically the idea. We'd have a staging environment which exactly mirrored prod and then became prod, or we deployed the same stuff to prod. The difference would be the database, of course, but might be worth us thinking about re-architecting our production server so it uses an AWS database rather than one in the container.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what they call that. It's right hosted database. That's going to be clear anyway. I can't remember the name of the thing.
They have a few, yeah.
Yeah, they do have a few. That's right. We'd want to just use the basic Postgres one.
Yeah.
And that'll be good for other reasons anyway. We already know there's other things that kind of are bad about letting the database live in the Docker container. So if we did that, then anyway, the database doesn't hold that much state. It's really just interview session data. So that's relatively safe. It's not the kind of things we're really worrying about testing. The main value of this is going to be if we have better test coverage of our actual interviews, because otherwise, how do we know the staging environment works?
Yeah.
We won't really, unless we have a test. So at least maybe we want to have an it's run test, some way to make that happen for every installed interview. Or maybe there's just one test that's for the Docker container that says the Docker container works because every installed interview, there's a YAML file that will run in the interview that's installed. Right, there are ways for us to kind of make a simpler version of the test that might not rely on us doing setup in every interview.
That is true.
We can also just add, we can have like a definition file that says, okay, run this YAML file in this package, and we could just maintain that. That's another thought. I mean, it's not a big deal to say, okay, you added a new package to the server, you want to make sure it still runs. The URL to visit to make sure it still runs. That would be fine. That's not a big maintenance burden every time we install a new package to have to edit the file.
Yeah, that's fair.
So that's the big idea. We can still, I guess now I've described it. I think Michelle had the same information, but we can wait to discuss it more till later, but at least we presented it.
Yeah, sorry, I want to think about it a bit more because I like the idea, but it's just a lot different than how we currently do things. So
it's a very big change, but I think it would solve some problems we ran into a few months ago. So it might be worth thinking about for that reason. And actually the person who spoke about it with me said like their issue was limited to the configuration YAML file. They were wondering, they had some production breakage that they seemed to trace to a change in the configuration file, but they didn't have that version. They didn't know when the configuration YAML changed. They didn't know if it had changed for sure. That was the kind of thing they were testing, but I was thinking, oh, that's really similar to the problems that we had with updating a dependency that was rarely used in new interviews. So we just didn't end up seeing the old interviews broke. Okay. So I think that would be a nice idea if we can figure it out. Worth a deployment change. We basically have our deployment, our infrastructure for production was just like what there wasn't really a plan for it. So I'm okay with making changes and reevaluating it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It does feel like we just need to be careful because I don't know, DevOpsy things are hard.
Yeah, it might help us make less things break, but you're right. Just making a big change like that could break things.
Yeah.
Totally
yeah,
right.
I remember how frustrating it was for Karina when some changes were made to the config file, but there's no backup. But how can you trace what was changed?
And I guess the answer would be like you'd have to have some separate way to make that part of the Docker deployment. Right now, it comes pulled in from S3, which isn't that particular thing doesn't become part of the test if you're using S3 to store the config. But it's okay. I don't think we want to drop S3 because it's good for backups, nothing else.
Yeah, it's good for backups.
Anyway, there's a lot to think about there, but I actually don't know if docassemble backs up your database when you have it on a separate server. I think it probably does not. So then is S3 still important? Maybe it's better to keep the config with the container in that scenario. Anyway, hard to, things to think about. All right. So Lily, I had kind of thought we could talk about what you had started working on or asking questions about at least, which was automating a form from scratch in the Weaver, because it might overlap with some of the things that are on our roadmap for Pew. And then I think you probably added this conditional checkbox function
Yes.
demo. Yes. Okay. So is there one of those you'd like to talk about first? Or I don't know if you still are thinking about the automating form from scratch problem. I just wanted to sync up ideas there. So if you want to, should we start with the demo maybe? And then we'll see.
Yeah, do demo first. It's a quick one. I have some questions. I mean, it's a tiny function, but I still have 2 questions.
Okay.
Okay, so let me share my screen. First, I want to make sure Brett saw this. I just want to set the record straight. Last time I said you added some code like this line, but you didn't, because I double verified it was not from you, it's from somewhere else. So I'm truly sorry.
Okay, no, but
Yeah.
my memory goes blank sometimes. I'm like, I made this change 2 days ago. I have no memory of it. So
All right. Okay, thank you. Now, this is the function I'm talking about. I'm going to demo. So basically, we want to output a checkbox so that people don't have to do the condition in a doc file, a template file. So here is the demo. See here, I get a box. This one looks normal. This one looks like so small. There's no space in between things. Yeah. I try to get it, make it larger. Doesn't matter what I do. I tried this, that, everything. It always comes like this tiny thing.
Well, I think in the docx it won't show that way, but I think on screen, I think you're right. Well, let's see the preview of the docx file. I think you might need to use a non-breaking space and NBSP, because that's just the way HTML works. It merges 2 spaces in a row into 1 space visually. That's what non-breaking space is for. Or at least that's why I learned how to use that HTML entity back in the day. That's probably not what the original purpose was.
Sorry.
Oh, interesting. So you're using...
No, I think I was trying different approaches.
Okay. Yeah.
Do this.
I mean, I think it's interesting to think about what is the right visual checkbox display in a form, in a Word document. And I've tried a bunch of things and I never got something better than using a the representation like that. Yeah, see, so that looks good in the document.
All right.
Tiny thing, I would use a capital X. That's just the convention I've seen people use rather than lowercase.
All right.
And I don't think people would be using this on screen. So I don't think you have to worry about the non-breaking space.
Right. Okay, so let's make it.
Just make it 2 spaces for empty. That's what I normally have seen people do. That's what I learned from. What's that?
Because that's what I've done before too, and a few docx stuff I've done this with. So
I think that will be great, just to be able to tell people this is what you do instead of writing this super long if statement. Tell people use this function. That'll be awesome. That's a really good one for going in misc.py, because we don't want to make people take an extra step to use it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this looks normal. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's
awesome. Thanks for doing that feature.
Yeah. So then the second question is this. Instead of calling docx checkbox, I'm just trying to think, okay, we could have more this kind of conditional variables down the road. So I said, okay, I'm just going to leave some space for expansion. That's why I coded this way. This is just, I was trying to use images for output, and it also works. That's the first one you saw as the download. But basically, that's the structure of the function. Can you think of any other field that's conditional?
Well, what I would think of is you might want to have it separated into 4 possible choices. So, or maybe 2, maybe 3. I mean, I think for the string value, I would let people have a choice of the checked and unchecked. So I might call the parameters unchecked string and checked string. And instead of having it be checkbox string equals none, I would make it have the default value there in the definition of the function. So you'd have like checkbox string, square bracket, X, square bracket.
Right.
then-
I mean, I do like make them do true or false. So it's like checked or unchecked. But because we could say, okay, someone wants checkbox, someone wants another
That's
variable.
where
They
I
don't
would
want this one. That's why I say
change it.
I also allow
I
none.
misunderstood the parameter. So the first parameter is the thing you're checking to see if it's true or false. So it wouldn't be replacing that one, it would be adding. I think you want to be able to let someone individually control what this value, that's literal, string literal. Let people customize it if they want to. They shouldn't really need to probably, but maybe they want to use 3 spaces instead of 2. Who knows? Or maybe they want to use a lowercase x or
Okay.
check mark symbol from
The
Unicode.
value, let them
Yeah.
input the value.
Let them change the actual string literals.
Okay. Okay.
And I do like the image idea. Can we, I don't know how to do this, but can we make a Jinja macro that then gets used by other files just by them referencing a function? I'm not really sure if we can. I don't know that anyone on this call would know the answer. Gone that deep into Jinja.
We could probably like output a string which contains a macro function or something like that. So that
Maybe what we could do is have it be, so in the end, the way that docassemble works in way Python docx works, and actually, Bryce, you might know this better than me since you've been looking deep into Python docx. It's inserting some block of XML. There must be some block of XML that would represent form control, right? Or various other things you might want to put into the HTML document. So maybe we let people do like raw docx code, and we have some other helper function that generates the thing for form control, an image, etc.
Are you saying that do you think there might be some docx or some docx native way of like adding a checkbox?
You can insert docx, Python docx, and docassemble allow you to insert raw XML.
Yeah.
Which would be
Yeah. So are you trying to say that you think using raw XML you can add like just a like docx checkbox specific thing? So that's a thing I've never seen before.
Oh,
right,
so
that you can
you've seen
add.
form controls in a Word file before?
No,
That's what I'm just describing.
maybe this is I've never seen form controls before. So
Okay, you can use them. I don't ever think it makes that much sense to use them, but I'm just trying to think like what are people going to want to do? They're going to either want to use a string literal like we're doing, and that's what I recommend people should do, or they might want to use something completely customizable. And I think making them insert an image may be too limiting, but maybe it is the way to go, because I guess they could override that static file. Let's go back to your YAML code and see that again one more time. So up top, you have it defined as a static file, right?
right.
Image checked and unchecked.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess that's good enough. That
Yeah.
might be all we really need.
I mean, if people want a macro, that's a different level of complexity. That if they are so sophisticated, they probably won't even need this function. What we're doing here is to say, okay, we're going to handle all those conditions in the file. All you need is to give us the input, we give you the output.
So this is relying, the only thing I don't like about this totally is that it's relying on you defining something in the YAML, which I think should be a parameter. I don't really like a hidden global variable state you're checking. So I would say
Agreed.
have it accept the DA file as a parameter with the image for the checked and unchecked. So we're back to 5 total parameters.
Yeah.
Wait.
You want to check. So the 5 parameters would be the thing you want to check for truth or false. That's what you have as checkbox string. I would rename that because I think it's confusing for it to be called string, but it's a bool. I would just call it value to check maybe, or something like that. And then I would have a parameter called something like checkbox string, checked and unchecked string, checked and unchecked image. And let the image
That's a lot. That's a lot of input. Here we are saying that you can put a true and false and false with your variable name, and then you use those variable names in your doc file, where you can either
That's not the way I was thinking someone would use it. Maybe I could show you really quickly what I was thinking.
I feel like the thing I'm thinking of is why do they need to be in the same function? Like, because I'm thinking of, like, if someone wants a string, they can call docx conditional var string. Not a good name, but like essentially just call the function to get the x or doc, like x or not x, and they can, if they want to override that with a y or a Unicode check mark or something, they can. And then if they want an image, it's the same thing, but it's just called image. Like the function itself is called image, and they can still pass in, like if they want to, they don't have to, but they can pass in a different DA static file that would override which one is the checked and unchecked picture.
I was thinking someone would use it like this inside the docx file. I think you're right. Sorry, I'm just jumping onto my question to see what you just said. I think you're right. We could make it 2 different functions. You're right. It could be the image version and the string version. But I don't think you would ever be setting it. This would always be given a parameter of the thing that's true or false, in my mind. And then it would input, it would lead to either the checks or the check, right? And it would be replacing something like this. So this is like way more compact to me and easier to read, understand what it does.
Yeah, that's the first line is what's in my template.
That is what you were doing. Okay.
Yeah.
Why is it setting? Was that just to do the demonstration? Maybe. Sorry. Show us your code again. That's the one. It seems like we are on the same page. I just wanted to make sure we.
Right. Let me find my docx.
And I made a little function like that to use in hot docs before, and it was really helpful to make my templates easier to read, because you get so messy with, especially with like in Washington State, they have all these Word document templates that are super formatted. So you have to fit all the logic in there.
So here is the code where you can.
I just wouldn't ever set it to a value and then use it in the template. I would directly be checking the value of, I would be displaying it there.
So fresh air checkbox. Let's see, fresh air checkbox. That one is calling this function, right? And that is using.
I would make the first parameter a positional parameter. I wouldn't make it a named one. I wouldn't make it optional. It should always be required. And it should be named something like value to check, I think. And I would use it the way that I was showing you on my screen. in the template, I would always mention the name of the variable you're checking in the template. I wouldn't make it something you set in the interview because it can get stale. It can be like out of date if you make a change. And I don't think it helps with clarity to have to keep track of another variable name. To me.
But how, wait, I think I'm confused. The variable will have to go through the code to get the answer, right? To get the final value.
You can reference a function that you defined inside the docx template. It doesn't have to be a built-in function.
Right, okay.
So the code would be running inside the Jinja tag in the inside your template.
So you're saying I don't need this.
Correct. Make that happen in the template itself.
All right. Good.
That makes sense. I didn't realize that. Yeah, that was the blocker. That makes sense that if you weren't sure you could do that, that would be the way to design. So yeah, it's actually just simpler than you thought it would be.
Right. Okay. Now, what about do we have another type of this kind of variable that I can try together? Can you think of any other
Type of variable?
Conditional variable other than checkbox?
Oh. Well, I think of the checkbox as being the thing you display in the template. So I think it's appropriate for that. Is that what you mean? The name?
No, what I mean is that,
No.
okay, let's say if you have a radio box,
Right.
radio button, which is different, looks different from checkbox,
Right.
and you need some kind of condition.
You want the radio button to display in the template, or you want to use a radio button question in the interview?
No, in the template output.
You want to show a radio button in the output.
Right. So could we also use this function to generate that kind of output? That's my question.
Yeah, I guess so. You could just use like a parentheses and a Unicode dot. I'm not sure what character that is.
Right. So my thinking is that this function will let you to say, okay, what type of variable I want. It's a checkbox or it's a radio box or something. So maybe we can say variable type, right? And you can say checkbox, radio box, radio button, or whatever, that we can make it work. And then we can do the value. So
I think it would be covered for me by just letting people change the string or the image. So I don't know that we need to do it, but if we do think there's two common use cases, I would analogize it to how the comma and list functions work, where they're two different functions for the different functionality. There's comma list.
So then you're saying for this one, we just do docx checkbox then. We don't need to generalize.
I don't think we have to generalize it to covering radio buttons if we let people change the string, which we're just saying we can do. We can make that the parameter.
Okay.
And Bryce, you're thinking we don't need to have a parameter for the image, just make a different function that puts an image in.
Yes.
So it seems valid to me.
Okay.
And I guess I don't know. Let's think about that. Inserting conditional images. If you want to go beyond a binary image, you don't really need to use a function.
Right. I don't mean checkbox. I mean something.
Yeah.
Something that we cannot produce by just doing string.
And we always want the input to be a Boolean, right?
So we can say variable type. So I don't know.
I don't really think we want variable type. I think we just want variable to check, and it's going to be a bool.
Yeah.
I find the name checkbox string a little confusing. But.
Okay. Well, I think it was mostly just because if that one was not none, then you would output a string, right?
Well,
I got it.
my original thinking is that if it's none, I mean, I'm not doing the checkbox. Maybe I'm doing something image.
Yeah, but if it was like if checkbox string was set to true, then it would display the checkbox as a string.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's why it's a little confusing because
Oh,
what
it's to give you
the
the different
parameter
kinds.
name is defining what the output is going to be. And that's why I was saying those should just be separate functions, and variable to check can be this. It can be the same parameter to both functions. So
I don't know if they're able to check it's the right name or not, but I can't think of a better one now, at least. But it's the concept we should be doing.
I feel like even I'm really bad, like as a computer science person, like I'm really bad at like conditional, like automatically thinking, oh, that's going to be a Boolean that like if it's true, something happens. Like I know this intuitively, but or I know this like as a fact, but I don't think about it. And it's not the first thing I jump to when I see the word conditional thrown around. So like, I don't know. I feel like var to check, variable to check is good, but that's just me.
Okay. Yeah. docx conditional var. Do we think? Well, I think we could go back to checkbox in the name. I don't know if docx is important or not in the name. I didn't want to just use the name checkbox because it would be kind of ambiguous inside the namespace of a full assembly line interview that what its purpose was. I guess we could call it output checkbox instead of display checkbox. There's various things we could call it.
What about that?
I think if we have docx checkboxes, we don't need the output. But we could use output checkbox or docx checkbox. Any quick thoughts? And then we'll pause here. We won't go on to the next agenda item. But
No, they're easy thoughts. But
I called my version in hot docs, I think I just called it checkbox. But I think that's too ambiguous to use in Simple. We want to make it clear it's a checkbox that's going to be displayed in the output file rather than on screen. Which is why I was thinking output or docx. I guess in theory, it wouldn't really make sense to use that in a PDF at all. So. All right. I guess the only thing is if we want to have an image version of this, we could add string to the name to clarify it's the version that puts a string in instead of an image.
No, for checkbox, I'm not going to do the string. It's because, well, I mean, image actually requires a lot more fiddling in docx template because you have to make a line up when it's an image.
To get it centered correctly, you mean?
Right. Like here, I tried different ways that, you have to see what the form looks like. Sometimes it's like within a cell of a table or something. So it's a lot more complex. The only time I think we want to use images that we cannot produce a string for that kind of output. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen.
I mean, I was just realizing we actually could let people use it to put an image in without changing the function signature at all. I think if you just made that a DA file and you returned the DA file, because you returned whatever they passed as the parameter, you would put a DA file there in the docx.
oh, that's weird.
I think that's what it does, though. And I guess if you use the raw, you could put in the docx code if you wanted the XML, but you'd have to put raw as a double bracket R is what you would need if you wanted to do that. If it was going to return XML. So maybe keeping it without giving it the string annotation on the function name is good. I like output checkbox. I think that's pretty clear.
I like output checkbox too.
Okay, not worry about image. When the need comes, then we deal with it. Right?
Okay.
We're trying to plan ahead
Yeah,
too
no, I love
far.
this. I always have to teach people how to do this. Like, how do they put a checkbox in their file? And if I could tell them, hey, use this function we made, it's way easier than trying to read the if statement. That's really complete confusing for people.
Okay.
So I love this. I'd love to, yeah, we could get it merged quickly. It's a small feature, easy to test. Thanks for working on it. Anything else people want to talk about this week?
Oh, do you want to, you said you have another thing that, okay. What about that automate?
Automating a form from scratch in the Weaver. So it's if you're working on it and want to talk about it to make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes. But I'm actually not working on it actively right now myself.
I'm gonna have to hop off of it. And so I don't know if I'll
Okay.
for this conference, but
Yeah.
So can we, yeah, just quickly verify my understanding is fine. I assigned myself to that issue. Was it 255 or something?
Where was it? On the Weaver, probably. Let's see if we can find it.
Yeah, 255. Okay.
What was it? What number?
255. 255.
Oh wow, it's way back.
I can share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead and show your screen. Sure, that'll be great.
Okay,
That's
check
right.
here. So this is what I'm going to work on. I'm going to work on step 1, where it says what is the Weaver generator interview without form output. So this one, it actually branches into 2. One is that someone has a form to upload, but in the end they don't need the template to download,
Right.
or they don't even have a template to upload to begin with. In the end, they don't need a template to download either. So the beginning point is different and the end point is the same without a template output, right?
Yep, it would be, you're right. I think the most common scenario would be if you don't have a form output, you don't really want to have a form input either. So we do already have a way to let you add new fields.
Right,
So
right.
that we could just take advantage of that and let people start going on an interview without having any fields and just add them. We just have to really make the upload your form part optional and let it handle not having a
yeah. So I think this would be like a phase 1 type of the automation of interview with from scratch without template to upload, because that one is more complicated and they may want template to download. In other words, you generate a regular interview instead of this kind of short survey feedback kind of interview, right?
Yeah, it could be for something like getting feedback. It could be like a triage tool someone's building where they're like, hey, you qualify for Medicare or you don't qualify for Medicare, right? It could be, there are a lot of kind of interviews you could do without any form as the output. And only one of them is really like, but at least one of the possibilities would be collecting data.
Right,
To me,
right.
you can separate the collecting data part from, save that part for later a little bit, I think.
Right. So what I'm working on is the first phase of what eventually we want to do with issue 497, which could eventually generate a template download, which will be more complicated, but this is one step toward that direction. This is my thinking. Does that make sense?
So just to restate it, I think you're saying you would want to work on just letting people not upload a file. Is that right?
No, I'm saying, okay, as step one, I'm working on allow people either upload a file or not upload a file, but in the end, we don't generate a template download.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense too.
Right.
So I think you're right.
So since we don't generate a download, we assume this is the short type of interview, like a survey feedback or whatever, the short type of one.
Yes, I think that you're right.
Right.
And we would just not have the download screen would have to change, right? We would need a new kind of screen for that.
Right, right. So good. I'm glad that we're on the same page. Now, since this is very different, I'm going to probably use a separate file instead of putting all the code into the main assembly line file, YAML file. Is that okay?
Well, I don't think it needs a new screen in the assembly line file, unless you mean the Weaver.
Oh, I mean the Weaver, the assembly line.yam file, the main.
Sure. Yeah, that helps make it easy to test. If we want to merge it later, that's no problem. You can make it a new file.
Okay, good, good. Because I think the logical would be there are a lot of things we need to skip because this is a short one, and the output will also be skipping. So maybe even the output pattern file will be a separate one. That would be easier to maintain or expand or whatever.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. I mean, I think we would probably want to figure out how to make it flexible, but adding flexibility before we know what we want the feature to look like is not as great. It's fine to just
all right, good, good, yeah. So then that's what I'm working on. Once the step, okay, so step one also involves creating a rec function for store variable snapshot. Right. And then we go from there. So step two would be like nothing. Step three would be modify or expand the existing stats interview.
Yeah, I think we decided we probably want to do that in the interview stats module, from what we could tell. That was what I was thinking, but maybe we want to merge the interview stats package and not make it standalone anymore. But I'm just thinking, if you want to be able to use statistics features in your interview, you want to be able to see the saving of them and the loading of and display of them in one place. And I guess people might really use that without using the rest of the assembly line. I know I pointed people to it on the Slack channel. So that's probably where that part of the issue will live. It will probably be part of something that happens in the interview stats package.
Okay. Okay. All right, that makes sense. So right now, that stats interview does not require anything from assembly line, right? It can't be standalone.
It does not require anything from assembly line. The stats feature is built into docassemble, and we're just displaying the things that are stored there.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Well, that's easy enough. I think it's really clear what you would be working on, and we'll see if there's a place when I start working on any of the features that overlap. Check in again.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay. All right.